today's episode, we're revisiting 5 of the worst games that I loved as a kid. Now, most of the time, the games I loved growing up, I still love and I still appreciate. Nostalgia is very powerful, but these games, even rose-tinted glasses aren't powerful enough to help with how bad these can be. So I figured it'd be interesting to go and take a second look at some of these and see what I think of them in 2025. With that being said, let's get to our first title. And the first title we're looking at is WWF WrestleMania, released from the Nintendo in 1988. So for this game, my oldest brother was the one who actually picked it up when he was a kid. I was just a baby when it came out, so it wasn't until a little bit later that I started playing it. And along with that, we had pro wrestling on the Nintendo, which that's an actual classic, and even as a kid, I knew it was a better game. But WWF WrestleMania was the only WWF game, whereas pro wrestling was, of course, made-up wrestlers. So there was always that aspect of WrestleMania where I wanted to play as the actual wrestlers that I was watching, which in this case there are 6 to choose from. Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Andre the Giant, Honky Tonk Man, Ted DiBiase, Million Dollar Man, and Bam Bam Bigelow. So let's start with the positive. I can actually give it 2 compliments. The character sprites are actually different sizes from one another, so Andre the Giant is much larger than the other ones, so that's actually commendable. And all the individual wrestlers have their original theme songs that they convey in the game. But that's about it. The wrestling ring is just in this black environment. There's no crowds. The controls are awful in this. The movement, hit detection, the grappling in the game is awful with an extremely limited amount of moves. The only thing I was able to do was body slam. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, you're just running around, slapping each other, kicking each other, headbutting each other. It's no frills. It's boring. It looks like just a bunch of chubby babies slapping each other. Especially Ted DiBiase. He looks really funny. It literally looks like his butt crack is hanging out, and it's pretty funny. Even just pinning your opponent is a trial. Simple things just don't work very well. The most fun you'll have with this game is playing with a friend. You'll have some laughs. It's pretty stupid, but that's about it. The game is extremely boring, rough to play, rough to look at. There's just nothing here. There's no features. And yeah, that's of the time. Not everything was loaded with features back in those days. But when you have something like pro wrestling, which has everything this doesn't, better controls, better graphics, better moves, just the heart of the gameplay is far superior. So when you know that exists and you have this, it has no reason to exist. It's just that bad. And for my oldest brother, it was certainly a letdown for him because he was excited for it as a WWF fan, and this is what he got. So yeah, thank goodness for pro wrestling on the other hand, which is not official WWF, but it's a very, very fun game and still holds up, and I want to include it in a video in the future. So do rose-tinted glasses help WWF WrestleMania in 2025? Absolutely not. There's no shade possible of rose to help this. And the next title on our list is Fatal Fury, released for the Super Nintendo in 1993. Now, I'm sure there are some that's going to consider this to be a hot take. I don't agree. I don't think it's a hot take because I'm talking about specifically this Super Nintendo port. I'm sure the original arcade and Neo Geo versions were just fine, and Fatal Fury and King of Fighters as a franchise is a classic franchise, but I'm being very specific about this one. Also, it has to contend with Street Fighter II Turbo that came out the previous year. Now, some of the pros of this game, of course, it has bright, colorful graphics, pretty good animations. The character art and designs are good, of course, because it's a classic franchise. All of that stuff is actually pretty good. Now, I have to be honest, one aspect of this that hasn't aged well across the board, doesn't matter which version you play, is the fact that you only have 3 fighters to choose from. Terry Bogard, his brother Andy Bogard, and Joe Higashi. The design of the characters are cool, but it's literally only 3. So when you have the likes of Street Fighter already around with 8 characters and 12 characters and beyond, that's not very many fighters to pick from. But other than that, it's a classic game in general. Where the problems come in is in the gameplay of the Super Nintendo port. The game is slow and sluggish. That's the key theme here. Very slow and sluggish. And the worst part is the input. The input for doing moves just sucks. The weird directional commands for both Andy Bogard and Joe Higashi, half their moves are really difficult to do. I ended up just falling back on Terry Bogard because his were easier. And this isn't just a straight up skill issue because I'm very experienced at fighting games. I'm pretty efficient at both Street Fighter, Killer Instinct, and many other games. I even gave Fatal Fury the benefit of the doubt that maybe it was just me not used to it. So I popped in Street Fighter II Turbo and had no problem. I was wrecking everybody and having lots of fun. So it's not me. It's just this game. It's just a sluggish port. And the AI is really cheap. Even though lots of AI was cheap throughout that time, it's really cheap here. One character was so bad with throwing out just non-stop punching tornadoes. Of course, he was clearly a ripoff of Balrog. I ultimately discovered an exploit of just jumping in place and kicking, and he kept falling for it until I beat him. If you have to beat the AI with an exploit in order to win, that's lousy design, even for back then. So as a kid, I really did play this a lot. I was determined to beat it. I was never able to because it's very tough, to the point of being half broken. But one thing I don't remember realizing as a kid, because I kept having game over from running out of continues, is you can turn that off and have infinite continues. Whoever thought having finite continues in a fighting game just wants to watch the world burn. And a side note, the wrestling character, it looks like he's puking on you, and I've thought that since I was a kid. I could be totally wrong, but that's kind of what it looks like. So as a kid, I was able to stomach this game, even though I already had Street Fighter and loved it. But playing this now, man, it's rough. Sluggish controls, horrible input, cheap AI, just slow and sluggish gameplay in general. Fatal Fury on the Super Nintendo is just not it in 2025. Yet again, we have a scenario of play this, not that. Play Street Fighter, don't bother with this Fatal Fury on Super Nintendo. Up next, we have Home Alone 2 Lost in New York, released for the Super Nintendo in 1992. Ah, Home Alone 2. How much I played you as a kid, how much I tried to beat you, and never could, because this game is very difficult. But just as much as it's difficult, it's strange. This game is weird. Now, do I hate the game? Actually, no, I don't hate it. I kind of like it, but it's not good. Trust me, it's not good. I would never legitimately recommend this to anybody. The moment you start it, it just continues to get strange. You have Mr. Hector calling up other hotels to get other hotel employees to come after Kevin, which is clearly not Tim Curry's likeness. I don't know who that's supposed to be. Then you have Harry and Marv calling up their old gang, which was not in the movie, also rounding them up to go after Kevin. Now, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern's likenesses are clearly here. I like how Harry's face is frozen in confusion and bewilderment, and Marv is frozen in anger and rage. I'm gonna kill that kid! And the game just continues to get even weirder. You literally have mops and bags and luggage coming after you, even to the point where a vacuum cleaner can suck you up and take your life instantly. You can almost picture it. They were in the middle of developing Poltergeist the game, then they had a corporate meeting and decided, nah, we're going to stop that and we're going to make a Home Alone game. I'm only kidding, I just made that up, but that's about the level of stupidity that would come out of a corporate meeting. You have hotel staff and cops and even customers coming after you. I understand the hotel staff and cops, but why are customers going insane? Everybody's nuts. You get these strange toy-like guns that you're able to at least use to defend yourself, to either knock around adults, stun them, or knock appliances around to get out of your way. You go up and down these elevators, you get into the different hotel rooms. Now that's where I actually do have a little bit of praise for the game. It actually has some pretty good visuals and animation. And it controls pretty well too. So it's not a broken game, it's just really tough, and it's really weird, and it makes no sense to the source material. As a kid, it was just as much fascination as it was fun because it was just weird. I didn't really know what to make of it, because I loved the movie growing up, but I didn't feel like I was playing the movie, I was just playing a weird game that I didn't know what to make of, so it just fascinated me. And there's times where you're going up and down elevators and it takes a long time and this weird, eerie music just starts playing. It's just so bizarre. This is one of the weirdest games I've ever played, especially from this era. That's kind of why I like it a little bit, because it's just odd. And I kind of like odd sometimes. And it stands out. But man, it gets frustrating. The difficulty is very high. You have very little ammo to work with in order to knock things out of your way. Jumping over them is very tough. You have a lot of instant deaths and very few lives to work with. And you don't even have continues in this game. It's just a pool of lives and then game over. So are rose-tinted glasses able to save Home Alone 2 in 2025? Not exactly. Like I said, I don't hate this game. I kind of like it because of how weird it is, but it's not a good game, and I couldn't genuinely recommend it to just anybody outside of maybe morbid curiosity. And the next game on our list is going to be The Adventures of Mighty Max, released for the Super Nintendo in 1995. Now, there's a little bit I gotta confess with this entry. I didn't grow up with the game itself. Don't get mad. Hear me out. What I did grow up with were the toys and a little bit of the TV show, but especially the toys. The toys are some of my favorite toys I ever had as a kid. They were really, really cool. They were literally entire worlds and environments enclosed in individual figures and sets. I had nearly all of them. I was obsessed with them. Come to think of it, that was one of the earliest things I ever collected were the Mighty Max toys. But alas, I don't have any of my toys from when I was a kid anymore. So, as a kid, I was all about it, but I didn't know about the game until later as a collector. So when I picked it up, I was like, oh, well, this is cool. I loved Mighty Max as a kid. Let's see if the game is any good. good Lord in heaven, it's not. Oh my goodness, this game is terrible. The concept is one of the most boring concepts I've ever seen in a platformer. The entire goal of the game is to scurry around a map, finding the pieces of some sort of weapon, and disposing them into portals. That's it. There are enemies all over the map that are there just to get in your way of trying to get these weapon pieces, so what you want to do is kill them, and they don't seem to respawn, so then you're able to solve these puzzles at your leisure. Even though it's functionally necessary, Max is able to jump like 2 stories, but when you have the weapon in your hand, you can't jump at all. You can only toss the weapon, and you have to toss it into things such as balloons, or platforms, or wherever you're able to throw it in order to get it from point A to point B. And that's where the physical puzzles come into play, and this is where the game loses me. Now let me give you a more modern example of what I'm talking about. Let's say The Last of Us. You take a trash bin, you physically move it over to a platform or window or whatever the case, so you can climb through it or climb up onto it and progress to the next scene to get to the gameplay that actually matters to you. This is just a mere filler segment or a breakup of the gameplay to move forward, but it's not the primary gameplay, it's just a chore. Or a more direct example would be Zelda Link to the Past, also on the Super Nintendo. Let's say you're cutting grass or pushing blocks around or picking things up and putting them down to activate switches, open doors, reveal locations, whatever the case may be. These are just mundane, trivial tasks or chores to get to what matters to you in the rest of the game. But for Mighty Max, that's the core gameplay. Whoever thought that was a good design, I'll never understand. It's not interesting and it's just not enjoyable. The enemy designs are extremely boring and lame. Max and the other characters you're able to play look really weird. Now, the art direction isn't great, but at least some of the technical visuals are at least decent. Scrolling backgrounds, colors, and animations, there are some decent graphics here. But it's hard to appreciate that when you have terrible music that plays all while you're trying to explore the environment and figure out these mundane puzzles. And to top it all off, you have time limits per life, so you're slowly dying as you're trying to solve all this. It's just lousy. I really don't like this game. Going into this game as someone who is nostalgic for the franchise, this is really bad, and I will never play this game again outside of exploring bad games. So Mighty Max on the Super Nintendo simply does not hold up in 2025. I just don't see how it can. And before we get to our last title, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. Let me know what games that you loved as a kid that really don't hold up so well in 2025. And finally, we have Batman Forever, released for the Super Nintendo in 1995. So before the game came out in 95, I actually watched Batman Forever the movie in theaters, and I really liked the movie. I was excited about that. So when the game came out, I got a hold of it, and I really enjoyed it, and I played it a lot. But even then, as a kid, I was fully aware this is not as good as Batman Returns, not even close. But I still latched onto it and played it a lot. But man, playing it now, this game is a nightmare. It has so many problems that I was able to somewhat overlook as a kid and just kind of play it anyway. But man, it is a hard pill to swallow now. Now, I will give it a few compliments. The visuals here are very impressive in a number of ways. Highly animated intro, digitized characters that are actually animated fairly well. There's some highly detailed environments here that are pretty jaw-dropping at times. So the game's visual splendor is quite impressive. Then there's a training mode that's actually more of a versus mode that you're able to fight against either other players or other AI, and you can select any of the characters in the game you want to fight with, and they all have their own look and feel. So it's actually pretty cool, and it makes the combat seem like it's actually pretty good, which is clearly based off of Mortal Kombat's mechanics. So technically the game is not without at least a few redeeming qualities, but Lord have mercy, where it falls flat, it falls hard. We'll get to some of the more basic mechanics in a second, but we gotta talk about the gadgets in this game that both Batman and Robin have. There are over 20 of them, and they make no sense and they don't work. Even when you try to break the booklet out and figure out the gadgets, the booklet doesn't match what the game says, so you can't even figure that out properly. It's all sorts of mixed up and makes no sense. Out of at least 8 different gadgets I tried to use, I got one to work. One. I'm not exaggerating. I'm willing to bet that there's some sort of online game facts, comprehensive list out there of how to use them properly, but who the heck is willing to go through all that to play this game? It's not worth that. So the mountains of gadgets are just outright ridiculous and make no sense. The default difficulty is pretty nasty. I recommend turning it down. Well, if I recommend playing in the first place. Even though I praise the graphics, one of the worst things about the graphics are how you can't see things. So they'll have objects that are right in front of your face on the screen, blocking entire sections of the screen where you can't see where you are or what you're doing. It makes fights difficult, it's disruptive, and there's literally times where you don't know where to go, and where you need to go is covered up. You're trying to figure out where to go and it makes no sense, and it turns out all you had to do was press down and shoulder button and drop down to the next level that you had no idea was there. Or you need to use your grappling hook to get through a spot in the floor above your head, but the only way it works is if you press up and select in a very specific motion for it to even work at all. Because going at it from an angle, you just swing left and right, it doesn't do anything. It's so scripted and nonsensical the way the maps play out. If you don't know it in order, you don't know where to go or what to do. You just fumble around until you eventually find it. And that's if you find it. Because if it's off screen and you don't know, you might just give up. So the level design, the puzzle design, the progression design is horrific. It's like, I got to go up here and fight these guys. And then because I went up here and fought these guys, another guy comes out of another spot down below. I got to go back down there and fight him. And because I did that, I got to go over to the left. And then I got to go up and I fight this guy. And then that opens the door. Or wait, oh no, it turns out this whole time I can kick the door. Oh wait, it turns out this whole time I can drop down below. Oh wait, it turns out this whole time it's off screen. It's just wild. The point I've made before about how you have other things to compare to in order to give you a baseline of what makes a decent game and what makes a not so decent game. When you have the likes of Batman Returns, that's pretty much a masterpiece of beat-em-ups on the Super Nintendo, then you have this with all of its glaring technical and design issues. It's really, really baffling. It's crazy. Clearly, they rushed to get this done in order to get it out as close to the film as possible, because it came out mere months after the film's release. And then there's Robin. Look at him. Look at him. That doesn't look like the movie. What is this? He looks really goofy. And when he uppercuts with his staff, it looks like he's drinking from a giant straw. And that's not even mentioning the Sega Genesis version. It's even worse. Because all the visual splendor that this version has, that one has none of it. It looks and sounds awful, on top of all this bad gameplay. So at least this one has the technical aspect of it in terms of the visuals, but everything else is just bad. Now that I think of it, a lot of the gameplay I did that I really liked was that versus mode. That's actually where I had the most fun. I ended up just playing that a lot as a kid. So that kind of half explains it, to be honest. The game is nostalgic for me because it is part of my childhood, but man, it just does not hold up in 2025. This game is just no good. So that was 5 of the worst games that I loved as a kid. It was very interesting to go back and look at these. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments what games that you grew up with that you liked and they don't exactly hold up today. I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless, and I'll see you later.